I spent the holidays at my best friend's family estate, and by the time the snow melted, her cold, widowed mother had stopped looking away from me at all. That's the whole shape of it. But to understand why a woman with a press nickname like the Ice Baroness of Ashcombe Hall would ever look twice at someone like me, I have to go back to the night before I left my own mother's house with a suitcase, a stolen scarf, and nowhere else in the world to be. My name is Callie Bright. I was 26 that December, an ER nurse with 11 months of unpaid overtime, and a fiancé who had left in September for someone who didn't smell like antiseptic at midnight. I am an omega, which in my stepfather's house was less a biology and more a verdict. That night, he'd stood in the kitchen doorway, holding my grandmother's hand-knit scarf between two fingers, like it was something he'd found in a drain. "You don't need this old thing," he said. "You need to stop dragging the past through my house." He dropped it in the trash. I fished it back out in front of him, cuff unraveling at my wrist, and didn't say a word. My half-sister Mara laughed into her wine. My mother watched the television instead of me. I left before dessert. I was still holding the scarf, snow-wet at the fringe, when Wren Ashcombe called and said the 6 words that ended that version of my life. "Come spend Christmas at my house." I want to ask you to do one thing before this story really starts, because it costs nothing and it means more to me than you'd think. If a story like this one is worth your night, subscribe to the channel. It's the difference between me getting to tell you the next one and not. Now, back to the snow, and the scarf, and the house I wasn't supposed to survive falling in love inside of. Wren had talked about her mother, the way you'd talk about weather that could kill you. Vivienne Ashcombe ran Ashcombe Maritime with a voice she never raised, and a silence that emptied boardrooms. She'd buried her husband, Julian, 5 Christmases ago, on a stretch of ice called Larkspur Bridge, and according to the tabloids, buried her ability to feel anything right alongside him. The staff called her the Ice Baroness. Wren just called her Mom, carefully, like a password that didn't always work. I didn't expect to like her. I expected to survive 4 days of expensive silverware and get back to my apartment before New Year's, alone, the way I liked it, the way I'd learned to like it. I did not survive that plan. Ashcombe Hall ate it whole. The house came up out of the snow like something built to be feared from a distance, gray stone, black windows, a drive so long the gatehouse had its own gatehouse. Wren was already laughing at my face before we'd even parked. "She's not going to bite you," she said. And then, quieter, like she wasn't sure herself. "Probably." Vivienne Ashcombe was standing in the doorway when we came in, stamping snow off our boots, and the first thing I understood about her had nothing to do with her face. It was her scent, black spruce and struck flint, cold enough to make the warm front hall feel like it was lying to me. She looked at her daughter first, softening exactly 1 degree. Then she looked at me and didn't soften at all. "Wren Stray," she said, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd note the weather. "Mom," Wren said, mortified. "It's fine," I said, and meant it less than I wanted to. "I'm cheaper to feed than a dog." Something flickered behind Vivienne's eyes. Not a smile. An audit. She might have gone on ignoring me entirely, filed me under daughter's friend, temporary, harmless if Mr. Holloway hadn't started choking on a fishbone 40 minutes later at the kitchen table where the staff took their supper. I heard it before I saw it, the particular silence of a person who has stopped being able to make noise. I was moving before I'd decided to move, which is the only part of nursing nobody warns you about, that your body starts making the call before your brain gets a vote. 3 thrusts under his sternum, and the bone came free and skittered across the tile, and Holloway sat back, gasping, red-faced, alive. The kitchen had gone dead silent. When I turned around, Vivienne Ashcombe was standing in the doorway, with her hand still on the frame, like she'd started to move, and then made herself stop. "You're a nurse," she said. Not a question. "Emergency department," I said. "Force of habit. Whose life have you saved before this one?" "I don't count anymore." It stopped feeling polite. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that costs more than a stare, because you can feel it deciding something. "You'll stay in the East Wing," she said finally. "Not the guest cottage. I want you closer than that." She didn't explain why. I didn't ask. I would spend the next several days learning that Vivienne Ashcombe gave orders instead of invitations, because orders were the only shape her caring had been allowed to take since she was a girl. That first night, someone left a mug of proper English tea, milk first, on my nightstand without a note. I hadn't told anyone in that house how I took my tea. I'd only mentioned it once, in passing, to Wren, 3 hours earlier. The East Wing was colder than the rest of the house and twice as beautiful, all dark wood and old portraits of Ashcombes who'd never once, judging by their expressions, been asked how they were doing. Wren gave me the tour, like a tour guide apologizing for her own museum. "Don't touch the vain vase, don't sit in grandfather's chair, and for God's sake don't mention Larkspur Bridge at dinner," she said. "Mom doesn't talk about the accident. Ever. Not even to me." What happened? Ice, a curve he'd driven 1,000 times. He didn't make the turn. Wren's voice went thin. "Rosalind says it was just bad luck." "Who's Rosalind?" "My aunt, sort of. Dad's business partner's widow, my mother's CFO now. She's been propping this company up since the funeral. She's..." Wren searched for the word. "Sweet in the way that leaves a mark." I met Rosalind Kane the next morning over coffee she poured for me before I'd asked, smiling with teeth that were very white and very still. "The little nurse," she said, like she was trying the phrase on for size. "How resourceful of Vivienne to find you." It wasn't a compliment. I filed it anyway, the way I file everything, under things to watch. The house was full of proof that money could buy almost anything except warmth, and Vivienne kept accidentally proving otherwise. The tea reappeared every night, milk first, no note. My favorite orange clove candle from the pharmacy back home turned up unlit on my dresser 2 days later, and when I asked Wren about it, she swore she hadn't said a word to her mother. Someone had listened to me mention it once, at dinner, mid-sentence, and remembered. The wealth gap announced itself in textures, not numbers, the give of a 200-year-old rug under my socked feet, the particular hush of a house with enough staff that no door ever slammed. I felt it most in the kitchen, where I found Vivienne alone on my 3rd evening, sleeves pushed up, attempting to recreate a soup her housekeeper made every December, and getting it visibly, furiously wrong. "You're burning the base," I said from the doorway. "I'm aware." "You want help, or you want to keep punishing that pot?" She looked at me for a second too long. "Both," she admitted, and it was the first time I heard something in her voice that wasn't armor. We ended up shoulder to shoulder at the stove, and I learned her hands were surprisingly unsteady for a woman who signed contracts worth more than my life. When I reached past her for the salt, my wrist brushed hers. Neither of us moved away first. The kitchen filled, faintly, with spruce and flint gone warm at the edges, and under it, for one unguarded second, something almost sweet. "Your scarf," she said later, nodding at it where it hung, still unraveled at the cuff, over the back of my chair. "It's falling apart. It was my grandmother's. I'm not ready to let it finish falling apart." Vivienne didn't answer, but 2 days later, I found it back on my chair with the cuff mended, small, even stitches, clearly done by hand, clearly done by someone with no practice and a great deal of patience. No note. I was starting to understand that notes were not how this woman told the truth. The reveal, when it came, wasn't about her identity. I already knew exactly who she was. It was about what the anniversary meant. Rosalind found me alone in the library on the 4th day, 4 days before Christmas, 4 days before whatever this house had been rehearsing, not grieving toward, for 5 years. "You should know something," she said, settling into the chair across from me with the ease of a woman who'd never once been told to leave a room. "Julian died on the 24th. Vivienne hasn't survived a single Christmas Eve since without collapsing somewhere private where no one can see her. You're not going to fix that. You're a distraction with a stethoscope." "Did you love him?" I asked, because something in the way she said his name didn't sound like grief. It sounded like inventory. Her smile didn't move. "Everyone loved Julian. That was rather the problem with him." I didn't understand the sentence until much later. That night, I found a brooch missing from the display case in the hall, a small gold thing shaped like a wren, Julian's gift to Vivienne the Christmas before he died, and by breakfast, Rosalind had discovered it in my coat pocket, held it up in front of the whole staff like a magician revealing a trick. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding," she said, in a voice built to make sure no one believed her. Vivienne's face went to stone so fast it frightened me more than shouting would have. "Leave us," she told the room, and it emptied in 8 seconds. "I didn't take it," I said. "I know," she said. "You know. I watched you sleep through half of last night's storm alarm because you'd been awake 40 hours straight saving my household manager's life. You don't have it in you to be clever and cruel at the same time, Callie Bright. Rosalind does." Something colder moved behind her eyes, colder than the flint in her scent. "This isn't the first thing that's gone missing from this house that she's made sure was found in the wrong hands. The blizzard hit that night, 3 days before Christmas, hard enough to take the power with it. The whole house went to candlelight and generator hum. And somewhere in that dark, the line between staying carefully apart and admitting we hadn't managed it anymore finally snapped. I found Vivienne on the floor of the study, not injured, just sitting, back against the cold hearth, staring at a photograph she'd pulled from a drawer she probably hadn't opened in years. Julian, laughing, a much younger Wren on his shoulders. "Every year on this date I tell myself I'll get through it standing up," she said, without looking at me. "I never do." I sat down across from her, close enough that our knees nearly touched, and didn't reach for her, because some kinds of grief need permission before they'll let you closer. "Tell me what happened." The real version. Not the insurance report. He found something in the books 3 weeks before he died. He wouldn't tell me what. Said he wanted proof first. Her voice was very level, which was how I knew it was costing her everything. He drove out to meet someone at Larkspur Bridge in the middle of an ice warning because he trusted the wrong person to be honest with him. You think it was Rosalind. I think I've spent 5 years too afraid of being wrong to ask the question out loud. She finally looked at me. "Say something honest to me. I get so little of it." "You mended my scarf," I said. "By hand." "Badly. It's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in longer than I can admit." Her mouth curved. Barely. It wasn't kindness that made me pick it up. It was that I couldn't stand to see something that mattered to you left in pieces. That's kindness. You just don't have a better word for it yet. The candlelight moved. Her scent had gone warm at the edges again, spruce softened by something almost sweet, and I understood, with the particular clarity that only shows up at 2 a.m. during a power outage, that I wanted to close the distance between us more than I had wanted anything in a very long time. "Tell me to stop, and I will." she said quietly, when her hand finally came up to my jaw. "Don't stop," I said. We didn't go further than that night allowed, a slow, careful kiss that tasted like wood smoke and felt like the first door in that house that had ever opened toward me instead of away, but something in her changed permanently in that firelight, and something in me did too. Restraint, I learned that night, could be its own kind of confession. The days after the blackout were the softest of my life. Vivienne showed me scars I hadn't asked to see, a thin white line along her forearm from a childhood her mother had run like a company with no room for weakness. The particular numbness she'd inherited along with the family doctrine that Ashcombs did not need anyone. My mother used to say love was a liability shareholders couldn't price, she told me, decorating the tree with an ease I hadn't seen in her before, hanging a small chipped ceramic wren beside the space where the gold brooch should have been. I built my whole life to prove her right. And then Julian died, and I discovered being right about that was the loneliest thing I've ever survived. I told her about my stepfather and the trash can and the scarf, about being called defective at family dinners for a biology I never asked for, about a fiancé who left because I wasn't soft enough or was too soft, depending on the week. "He was a fool," she said simply. "So was your mother," I said, and she laughed, a real one, short and startled out of her, like it had gotten loose before she could stop it. We were happy for 4 days. I should have known this house didn't let anyone keep 4 days for free. The call came on the morning of the 23rd. Wren's phone, unanswered. Wren's car, found empty at the foot of Larkspur Bridge, driver's door open. Engine still running, snow already filling the seat. Vivienne's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. The mask I'd watched her lower for me over 4 days slamming back into place so completely it was like watching a door shut on a house fire. "Get everyone out searching," she said, voice gone flat and terrible. Now, Rosalind arrived within the hour, composed, competent, devastated in exactly the right proportions. "I'll coordinate with the police," she said, taking Vivienne's hands like she had any right to comfort at all. "You should rest. You're no use to Wren collapsed." Something in the way she said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, for a woman who claimed to be blindsided, snagged in my chest like a wrong pulse. I didn't say anything yet. I just started counting. I remembered, standing in that freezing hallway, the ledger Wren had mentioned once in passing, a spreadsheet she'd found strange and hadn't understood, sitting in a locked drawer of her father's old office that nobody had opened since he died. I remembered Rosalind's smile the day the brooch turned up in my coat. I remembered her saying everyone loved Julian, that was rather the problem with him. Like love had been an obstacle to something. Vivienne stood at the window, watching the snow bury the road that had already taken her husband, and I understood, watching her, that if we didn't find the truth before the search parties found something worse, this house was about to lose another person to that bridge. I went to find the one thing I actually knew how to do in a crisis. Work fast, work quiet, and not look away. I broke into Julian's old office with a letter opener and 40 minutes before anyone noticed I was gone. The lock was older than the security system built around it, and 5 years of dust told me nobody had thought to look there for anything, which told me something too. The person who mattered most in that room hadn't been treating it as evidence. She'd been treating it as a grave. The ledger was exactly where Wren remembered, except it wasn't a ledger. It was 3 years of shipping manifests with numbers that didn't reconcile, insurance claims filed on cargo that had never existed, and a name on every falsified signature line that wasn't Julian's. Rosalind Kane had been bleeding Ashcombe Maritime dry since before he died, and the last entry, dated 2 days before the accident, was in his handwriting, "Confront R." Tomorrow night. Bridge, alone, her request. I was still reading when the study door opened behind me. I turned, expecting Vivienne. I got Rosalind instead, still in her search party coat, snow melting off her shoulders, smile gone entirely. "You shouldn't be in here," she said. "Neither should the person who tampered with his brakes," I said, holding up the ledger, my heart going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. "He found you. That's why he drove out there. You didn't lure Wren onto that bridge by accident either, did you? You needed her gone before her birthday, before the trust transfers, and someone finally opens the real books." Rosalind's face did something ugly and honest for the first time since I'd met her. "He was going to ruin 15 years of work over a rounding error he didn't understand," she said, and her voice had lost every trace of sweetness, gone flat and furious instead. "I built this company as much as he did. Nobody put my name on the door. I didn't get the chance to answer." She came at the ledger, and me with the letter opener I'd left on the desk, and I did the only thing 11 years of emergency medicine had ever taught my body to do under threat. I moved, fast and low, and the blade caught my forearm instead of my throat, a clean burning line, and then Vivienne was in the doorway. I have never in my life seen anyone move the way she moved. She crossed that room like weather, got a hand on Rosalind's wrist, and twisted until the letter opener hit the floor, and for one terrible second, I watched her face and understood she could kill this woman right there, and no jury in the county would blame her. "Vivienne," I said, blood running warm down my wrist, voice steadier than I felt. "Don't. Let her answer for it standing up, in the light, where everyone sees what she did. That's worse for her than anything you could do here in the dark." Something in Vivienne's shoulders broke, just slightly, just enough. She didn't let go of Rosalind's wrist. But she didn't finish the motion her whole body had already started either. "Where's my daughter?" she said instead, voice like a blade with no edge left to hide. Rosalind, cornered, gave it up in pieces. Wren wasn't hurt, just frightened, locked in the old gatehouse a half-mile down the frozen drive, meant to be found too late, meant to look like one more accident on one more icy road. We found her 40 minutes later, cold and furious and completely unharmed, and I have never in my career felt a pulse under my fingers that I was gladder to count. Christmas Eve, the house filled anyway, because Vivienne refused to let one more anniversary belong to grief alone, and because the board had already been summoned for an emergency session that could not wait for the holiday to end. I stood at the back of the drawing room with my arm bandaged and my grandmother's scarf around my neck, while Vivienne, in front of the entire board and half the family, played the recording Wren and I had pulled from Julian's hidden files, Rosalind's own voice, 5 years old, arranging a private meeting on Larkspur Bridge, and then, layered under it, her voice from that afternoon. Admitting everything to a room she hadn't known, was still listening. The silence afterward had weight. Rosalind was led out between 2 officers without a single word of the smoothness she'd built her whole reputation on, and the room that had spent 5 years quietly wondering about Vivienne Ashcombe watched her stand very straight and say, "My husband was murdered by someone this family trusted. My daughter was nearly the next name on that list. And it was found, uncovered, and stopped by a woman half of you dismissed the moment she walked through that door, because she wasn't born into any of this." She looked at me across the room, and for the first time she did it in front of everyone. I will not be making that mistake again. I called my mother the next morning, briefly, to tell her I wasn't coming back for New Year's, and to mention, almost as an afterthought, that Gary's contracting firm had just lost its largest client of the year. Ashcombe Maritame had quietly pulled the account the moment Vivienne learned how he'd spoken to me at that table. Mara's fiancé, it turned out, worked in procurement for the same client and had heard exactly why. Small towns talk. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt, for the first time in years, simply unbothered. Vivienne found me on the back terrace that evening, snow falling clean and silent over the gardens, my breath fogging in the cold. She didn't say anything at first. She just took my bandaged hand in both of hers, careful of the stitches, and pressed her mouth once, gently, to my knuckles. I spent 5 years telling myself control was the only thing keeping this family standing, she said. You walked into my kitchen and saved a man's life before you'd even taken off your coat, and I have not stopped watching you since. I don't know how to do this softly. I never learned. You mended a scarf by hand, I said. You already know how. Tell me to stop, and I will, she said again. The words I now understood were the truest sentence she owned, and this time when I answered, "Don't stop," there was nothing careful left between us. Her mouth found the curve of my neck, my scent gland, the place every nerve in an omega's body has been waiting its whole life to feel claimed at, and she paused there, lips just barely grazing skin. "Ask me with your words," she murmured. "I need to hear you say it. I want this. I want you. Don't stop." The bite, when it came, was gentle and absolute at once, and the bond that opened between us afterward felt like a window thrown wide in a house that had been sealed shut for 5 winters. I felt her grief for the first time from the inside, and under it, impossibly, something warm and new and entirely mine. She proposed on New Year's Eve, kneeling in the same drawing room where she'd once called me Wren's stray, a small box in her palm and Holloway pretending very badly not to cry by the door. In 15 years, he told me later, voice rough, I have never once seen her wait for anyone the way she waits for you to walk into a room. We were bonded properly in the spring, in the garden, with a scarf red ribbon woven through the flowers, because I'd told her once, in passing, months before, that I'd always wanted red at a wedding and never expected to get one. She'd remembered. She always remembered. The gold Wren brooch, recovered from Rosalind's townhouse during the investigation, sat pinned at my collar during the ceremony, restored to the family it had always belonged to, restored to a house it had finally stopped haunting. A year on, Ashcombe Hall doesn't feel like a museum anymore. It feels like a home that finally has enough voices in it. Wren runs the foundation with a fierceness that would make her father proud. Rosalind Kane is serving a very long sentence in a facility with no view of any bridge at all. My stepfather sends occasional cards I don't open. I don't need to. That version of my life closed the door quietly behind me the night I pulled a scarf out of a trash can and didn't look back. Last December, on the anniversary that used to break my wife standing up, I found her in the study again, but this time she wasn't alone on the floor with an old photograph. She was by the window, watching new snow fall clean over a garden that had learned how to hold both grief and joy at once. My mended scarf looped once around her own throat because she'd started wearing it too, some mornings, without ever quite admitting why. "Still counting exits?" she asked, not turning around, and I heard the smile in it before I saw it. "Force of habit," I said, crossing to stand beside her at the glass. "Whose?" "Mine. Yours now too, I think." She reached back and found my hand without looking, the way you reach for something you've stopped being afraid of losing. Outside, the first real snow of the season kept falling, soft and endless, over a bridge that had finally stopped being the only thing this family remembered about winter. I used to believe that being overlooked was simply the shape of my life, the way some houses are built cold and stay that way no matter how many fires you light in them. I don't believe that anymore. Some people are never seen because no one has looked hard enough yet. It only takes one person looking long enough to change the whole architecture of a life. The end. If any part of this one settled in your chest the way it settled in mine, the scarf, the ledger, the porch light left burning for someone who finally made it home, that's exactly why these stories get made, and subscribing to the channel is what keeps them coming. I'd love to know what you'd have done in Callie's place. Finding that ledger with 40 minutes on the clock and everything to lose, would you have run for help or stayed to finish reading? Tell me in the comments. Thank you for spending these holidays at Ashcombe Hall with me. I'll see you in the next story where another quiet, overlooked heart finally gets found.